In the early years of World War II, the Pacific Ocean was no longer just water. It had become a vast, deadly battlefield. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan controlled enormous stretches of sea, moving troops, fuel, and weapons across vital shipping lanes with confidence. For a time, the Imperial Japanese Navy believed it had secured dominance beneath the waves as well. But hidden in the darkness below the surface, a new threat was emerging. American submarines, once underestimated and plagued by early technical failures, began to evolve into silent hunters. Among them was one submarine that Japanese sailors would soon come to fear, a vessel so effective against escort ships that it earned a chilling nickname, the Destroyer Killer. This was not a legend born of propaganda. It was a reputation forged through precision, patience, and relentless attacks. In an era when destroyers were designed specifically to hunt submarines, this American boat reversed the roles. Instead of fleeing from escorts, it stalked them. The war situation was tense. Japan depended heavily on maritime supply routes to sustain its far-flung empire. Every convoy mattered. Every ship carried fuel, food, ammunition, or reinforcements. Losing even one could weaken an entire campaign. Losing several in rapid succession could trigger panic. And then it happened. Over the course of just 4 days, multiple Japanese ships vanished beneath the sea. Escorts failed to protect their convoys. Sonar searches came up empty. Depth charges exploded harmlessly in the distance. The enemy was invisible and deadly. Reports reached Tokyo describing a submarine that struck swiftly and disappeared without a trace. Commanders were stunned. Sailors whispered warnings. Routes were altered. Escorts doubled. But the ocean was vast, and the Destroyer Killer was already waiting. This was the beginning of one of the most shocking submarine rampages of the Pacific War, a moment when a single American submarine proved. As the war between the United States and Japan spread across the Pacific, the ocean became the primary arena of survival. Unlike in Europe, where land battles defined front lines, the Pacific War was decided by control of the sea. Whoever ruled the shipping lanes controlled fuel, food, aircraft, and ultimately, victory. Japan entered the war with a powerful surface fleet and some of the world's most experienced naval crews. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers formed the backbone of its naval strategy. Early victories reinforced confidence that enemy submarines could be detected and destroyed before becoming a serious threat. But this confidence proved dangerously misplaced. American submarines, operating thousands of miles from home, were tasked with an enormous mission: cut Japan's lifelines. These boats targeted cargo ships, tankers, and troop transports, vessels that rarely made headlines but carried the war on their decks. Every torpedo that struck a freighter weakened Japan's ability to fight. At first, progress was slow. Faulty torpedoes, unreliable detonators, and limited intelligence hampered U.S. submarine operations. Crews faced long patrols, poor communication, and constant mechanical strain. Yet experience bred improvement. Tactics evolved. Torpedoes were fixed. Commanders learned how to attack aggressively and disappear silently. Japanese destroyers were deployed to counter this growing threat. Equipped with sonar and depth charges, they hunted beneath the waves, confident in their ability to protect convoys. But submarine warfare was changing. American boats began to exploit weaknesses in escort formations, striking at night, attacking from unexpected angles, and using the vastness of the Pacific as cover. Slowly, the balance shifted. By 1943 and 1944, U.S. submarines were sinking Japanese shipping at an alarming rate. Fuel shortages crippled fleets. Aircraft sat idle. Supplies failed to reach isolated garrisons. The submarine that would earn the feared nickname Destroyer Killer was not extraordinary in appearance, but it was deadly by design. She belonged to the new generation of American fleet submarines introduced during World War II, long-range boats built to operate deep in enemy-controlled waters for weeks at a time. Powered by diesel engines on the surface and electric motors underwater, the submarine could travel thousands of miles without support. She carried a full load of torpedoes, both in forward and aft tubes, allowing attacks from multiple angles. Her diving depth exceeded that of earlier models, giving her a crucial advantage when evading enemy destroyers and depth charges. But steel and machinery alone did not create a killer. The real strength of the submarine was her crew. Typically numbering around 80 men, the crew lived in extreme confinement, cramped bunks, stale air, constant engine noise, and the ever-present threat of detection. Many were barely in their 20s, yet they operated some of the most complex technology of the war. Every man had a role, and every role mattered. One mistake could mean death for all. Training was relentless. Crews practiced silent running, emergency dives, torpedo firing solutions, and damage control until their reactions became instinctive. Submarine commanders were taught to think independently, often cut off from higher command for entire patrols. Decisions had to be made in seconds, under pressure, with incomplete information. Special emphasis was placed on attacking escorted convoys, the most dangerous targets of all. The crew learned how to read sonar patterns, anticipate destroyer movements, and exploit gaps in escort formations. Rather than avoiding destroyers, they were trained to outthink them. This combination of advanced design, disciplined teamwork, and aggressive doctrine transformed the submarine into a hunter capable of taking on ships meant to destroy her. When war finally put these lessons to TH, the 4-day rampage began quietly, without warning, in the open waters of the Pacific. There was no dramatic announcement, no immediate sign that history was about to shift. Inside the American submarine, the crew moved with practiced silence as radar and periscope scans revealed a Japanese convoy on the horizon. The first target was not a warship, but a vital transport vessel escorted by destroyers. This was deliberate. Submarine doctrine had evolved: strike the heart of the convoy and force the escorts to react. By attacking the most valuable ship first, chaos could be created within seconds. The commander chose patience over speed. The submarine stayed submerged during daylight, tracking the convoy's course while remaining outside sonar range. As night fell, the boat surfaced briefly to recharge batteries, then slipped back beneath the waves, positioning itself ahead of the enemy's path. Just before dawn, the attack began. From a forward torpedo tube, a single weapon was launched. Moments later, a second followed. The crew waited in silence, counting seconds. Then the ocean erupted. A violent explosion tore into the target's hull, followed by a second detonation that sealed its fate. The ship slowed, burned, and began to list heavily. Japanese destroyers reacted instantly. Searchlights cut across the water. Sonar pings echoed through the submarine's hull. Depth charges followed, shaking the boat violently, but failing to find their mark. The submarine descended deeper, reducing speed to near silence. This was not a retreat, it was a setup. By forcing the escorts into a frantic search, the submarine drew them away from the remaining ships. The commander had achieved his objective. The convoy was now vulnerable. As the first ship slipped beneath the waves, the crew knew this was only the beginning. The tactics had worked perfectly. As the attacks continued, it became clear that the Japanese escort ships were fighting an enemy they did not fully understand. Destroyers were designed to hunt submarines, yet in this battle, their greatest weakness was not courage or firepower, it was doctrine and technology. Japanese escorts relied heavily on early sonar systems that performed poorly under real combat conditions. Thermal layers in the Pacific often bent sound waves, creating false contacts or masking submarines entirely. Each sonar ping echoed through empty water, giving commanders confidence without certainty. When a contact was lost, destroyers frequently assumed the submarine had escaped, rather than remaining directly below. Radar offered little help. Early Japanese surface search radar was limited in range and resolution, especially at night or in rough seas. American submarines exploited this weakness by attacking in low visibility, surfacing briefly only when necessary, then disappearing before radar operators could react. Tactical errors compounded these problems. Escorts often abandoned their protective positions to pursue suspected contacts, leaving convoys exposed. Instead of maintaining tight defensive screens, destroyers chased shadows. Depth charges were dropped too shallow, based on outdated assumptions about submarine diving limits. By the time charges detonated, the American boat was already far below. Communication failures further weakened the defense. Escorts rarely coordinated sonar data effectively, resulting in overlapping searches or large blind zones. Meanwhile, the submarine crew listened carefully, tracking propeller sounds and sonar pulses to anticipate enemy movement. These mistakes created a deadly pattern. Each failed counterattack taught the American commander more about Japanese habits. Each explosion increased panic among escort crews, leading to rushed decisions and wasted ammunition. The Japanese Navy had the numbers, but not the adaptability. The turning point came when the hunter became the hunted. Japanese destroyers were built to destroy submarines. Fast, maneuverable, and heavily armed with depth charges, they represented authority and protection within every convoy. To lose a transport ship was painful. To lose a destroyer was unthinkable. Yet that is exactly what happened. As one destroyer broke formation to pursue a suspected sonar contact, it unknowingly placed itself directly in the submarine's path. From below, the American commander watched patiently through the periscope. The destroyer's speed, course, and aggressive maneuvers revealed a fatal mistake. It had isolated itself. The submarine moved into position with calculated precision. At close range, a torpedo was fired. Seconds later, a second weapon followed, ensuring there would be no escape. The impact was devastating. An explosion tore through the destroyer's hull near the engine room. Power failed instantly. Flames erupted as fuel ignited. Within moments, the ship began to list sharply. Crew members scrambled across the deck as alarms screamed through the night. There was no time for organized damage control. For the escorts watching nearby, disbelief replaced discipline. A ship designed to hunt submarines was sinking fast. Search patterns collapsed. Depth charge attacks stopped. Radios filled with frantic reports that made little sense. The psychological impact was immediate. Destroyer crews had trained to fear submarines, but not to be helpless against them. Confidence shattered. Commanders hesitated. Sailors began to question sonar contacts, orders, even their own equipment. When the destroyer finally slipped beneath the waves, it took more than steel and machinery with it. It carried away the illusion of control. From that moment on, every shadow, every sonar echo became a threat. The ocean felt hostile. The submarine had crossed a line, proving that even the hunters were vulnerable. By the fourth day, it was clear that this was no ordinary patrol. What had begun as a calculated attack had become one of the most destructive submarine missions in the history of naval warfare, not because of its duration, but because of its speed. In just 4 days, 5 Japanese ships had been destroyed. Each sinking followed a precise rhythm. The submarine would detect a convoy, position itself ahead of the target, strike without hesitation, and vanish before effective countermeasures could be organized. There were no wasted torpedoes, no reckless chases. Every action was deliberate. For the Japanese Navy, the losses came too quickly to respond. Convoys were rerouted, escorts reinforced, and emergency signals sent, but the attacks outpaced every adjustment. Commanders were reacting to yesterday's disasters while facing new ones in real time. What made the mission especially devastating was its efficiency. The submarine operated deep within contested waters, far from friendly ports, relying entirely on its crew's endurance and training. Sleep came in short bursts. Meals were eaten standing. The air grew stale. Yet discipline never faltered. Intelligence officers would later study this patrol in detail, noting how quickly the commander adapted after each engagement. Every encounter improved the next. Escort behavior was anticipated. Sonar patterns were memorized. Escape routes were refined. The psychological effect extended beyond the immediate losses. News of the sinkings spread rapidly through Japanese naval channels. Fear replaced routine. Crews approached convoys with caution instead of confidence. Destroyers hesitated to break formation. The initiative had shifted. This mission did not win the war by itself. But it demonstrated something far more important. that a single, well-commanded submarine could dismantle an entire defensive system in days. In the silent depths of the Pacific, history had been rewritten quickly, efficiently, and without mercy. When reports of the losses reached Japanese naval headquarters, the reaction was immediate and grave. What troubled commanders most was not only the number of ships sunk, but the speed and precision of the attacks. This was no random encounter. It was a calculated operation that exposed serious weaknesses in Japan's maritime defense. Emergency meetings were called. Intelligence officers reviewed incomplete logs, sonar reports, and survivor testimonies, searching for patterns. Some believed multiple submarines were operating in the area. Others feared a new American tactic had been deployed without warning. The idea that a single submarine could cause such destruction was difficult to accept. Orders were issued within hours. Convoy routes were altered, often lengthened to avoid suspected patrol zones. These detours increased fuel consumption at a time when oil shortages were already crippling the fleet. Schedules were delayed. Supplies arrived late or not at all. Every change created new vulnerabilities elsewhere. Escort doctrine was also revised. Destroyers were instructed to remain closer to convoys, even when sonar contacts appeared convincing. Aggressive pursuit was discouraged in favor of layered defense. But these adjustments came with a cost. Escorts now covered fewer ships, stretching limited resources even thinner. Communication failures worsened the situation. The vast distances of the Pacific made real-time coordination nearly impossible. By the time warnings reached ships at sea, the submarine had already moved on. Crews were left relying on outdated intelligence and uncertain orders. Perhaps the greatest impact was psychological. Confidence within the escort forces eroded. Commanders questioned their equipment. Sailors scanned the water constantly, unsure where the threat might emerge. The ocean no longer felt controlled. The Japanese Navy had been forced into a defensive posture, reacting instead of dictating. A single submarine had reshaped strategy A. The immediate tactical victories of the submarine quickly translated into far-reaching strategic consequences. Japan's war effort relied heavily on maritime supply routes, stretching across thousands of miles to sustain remote garrisons and fleet operations. Fuel, ammunition, food, and reinforcements all traveled by sea, and the sudden losses exposed vulnerabilities that were previously underestimated. As ships vanished beneath the waves, entire supply chains were disrupted. Convoys slowed or diverted, delaying critical resources to the front lines. Fuel shortages forced aircraft and warships to remain docked or operate at reduced capacity, undermining offensive operations. Isolated garrisons faced dwindling rations, weakening morale and combat readiness. Even minor delays compounded into cascading effects across the Pacific theater. Strategically, the Japanese Navy was forced onto the defensive. Patrols were rerouted to protect vital shipments, but doing so stretched an already thin fleet. Commanders were forced to weigh risk versus necessity constantly, send escorts to one convoy, and leave another exposed. Every decision carried high stakes. Moreover, the psychological effect on naval planners and crews amplified the material damage. Confidence in convoy protection eroded, and fear of unseen submarines dominated strategic thinking. American submarines, once seen as nuisance vessels, were now recognized as instruments capable of shaping the course of the war. By striking swiftly and effectively, the destroyer killer demonstrated that a single, well-commanded submarine could paralyze supply lines, cripple operational planning, and shift strategic momentum. In the vast expanse of the Pacific, it proved that control of the seas was no longer absolute, and that under the surface, a hidden threat could dictate the outcome of the war. The legacy of the destroyer killer extends far beyond the immediate losses inflicted on the Japanese fleet. Historically, this submarine patrol demonstrated a fundamental truth about naval warfare. Dominance on the surface does not guarantee control beneath the waves. A single, well-trained submarine could disrupt entire supply chains, sink heavily defended ships, and force an enemy navy to alter strategy, lessons that reshaped naval doctrine for decades to come. In the aftermath, navies worldwide reevaluated their approach to anti-submarine warfare. Improved sonar, radar, and convoy tactics became priorities. Fleet commanders recognized that technology alone was insufficient. Success depended on training, adaptability, and anticipating the enemy's moves. The psychological dimension, fear of the unseen and the unknown, was equally important, as it could slow decision-making and force defensive postures. Modern naval planners continue to study these operations. Submarines remain asymmetric threats, capable of challenging superior surface fleets, protecting supply lines, and projecting power far from home ports. The Pacific campaigns of World War II remain a case study in combining stealth, strategy, and precision to achieve disproportionate results. The destroyer killer also reminds us of the human element in warfare. Discipline, teamwork, and rigorous preparation allowed a small crew to alter the course of events on a massive stage. Today's sailors and commanders draw on these lessons, emphasizing readiness, technological mastery, and the importance of understanding the enemy as much as the environment in which they operate. Ultimately, the story of this submarine underscores that even in the vastness of the ocean, small, decisive actions can have far-reaching consequences. Its patrol serves as both a historical milestone and a continuing guide for navies seeking to balance power, intelligence, and unpredictability in modern maritime conflict.